Hi, welcome to How to Repair. You might be asking yourself what I'm doing in front of a camper van. Well, let me explain. For the last 20 years now, I've been making domestic appliance videos for you and also solar videos. I wanted to actually go into doing a bit of traveling, and over the last 20 years I've actually made a lot of friends on YouTube in the domestic appliance industry all over Europe, and they've always given me the open offer of visiting them, and I've never taken them up on this. Well, that's going to change. Firstly, let me explain the series of videos that you're going to see over the course of the next few weeks. Firstly, I've got a film studio and a laundry in the Algarve in Portugal, which is now totally powered by solar water and solar electricity. I've also, because of extortionately high bills in the United Kingdom over the last year and a half, had to turn my property into an off-grid situation. I have 11 kilowatts of panels here, another 4 kilowatt of panels over the back, and this goes through to a 50 kilowatt battery system, which is all run by the Victron energy system. Now, this camper van I've converted, ripped out the interior because it needed a lot of TLC, it needed new electrics, and it needed new refrigeration as well because that didn't work. Managed to get it cheaply because it's a left-hand drive and it had low mileage, but the interior was lacking in being able to be a nice household for me while I'm traveling. So what we've done is we fitted 700 watts of panels on the top. That's a 400 watt panel and 305 watt panels. This goes through to 2 MPPT controllers, which then sends the power to the Lynx Distributor and the Lynx Shunt, which then charges a 3.5 kilowatt lithium iron phosphate battery with its own heating systems for when I'm in colder climates. I have a 2 kilowatt compact inverter, which is a constant running 2 kilowatt, and I think I have a peak power of 3 or 4 kilowatt. I also fitted the Orion-Tr, which is an alternator or battery to battery charging system that allows me to charge while I'm on the run. Now, this took me 3-4 weeks to actually convert, and I've also fitted a Starlink satellite system on the roof so I can upload videos for you while I'm on the move. And I also fitted a very large fridge freezer, not only to accommodate all the food, but all the beer donations that you keep sending me, which I'm really appreciative of. So let's go inside and have a look at what we did, and this is 2-3 weeks ago, to where we are today. Okay, I've already done a test mounting of where everything's going to go to maximize ventilation. Also, behind here I have 2 air vents where the fridge used to be, so I'm going to end up with air coming in from the bottom and air being extracted at the top. And by putting this board on and then the other board on, it's going to be totally isolated. This means that there's no damp or moisture ever going to get in here. I've also got a hole in the floor with a ventilation tube, which will allow air to come up into this unit because it will get warm, especially as I'm touring in hot climates. Now, I've already pre-drilled all the holes, as you can see, and I've marked up everything, but this is not fire retardant. So what I want to do is fit a nice sheet of steel in here, and I'm just going to drop this in. I've already pre-cut it, and now I'll be able to take the back plate off and drill all the holes, and it will look really nice and also be fire retardant as well, and it will give me a good base to earth everything through. Okay, we've taken the aluminium plate out and we've pre-drilled all the holes for the individual units. Now, the reason I've done this is to make it easy for mounting everything so I know where it's going to go. So the first time I did this, I actually put everything on the wall, made a decision of where I wanted it, then I marked up and actually cut the aluminium plate. This gives me a good fire retardant plate, and also it gives me a good earthing point through the whole system. The socket I've already fitted down at the bottom. This is a twin AC socket. One's for the fridge freezer to keep the beer cold, of course, and the spare there is always useful for soldering iron, or if I've got any other electrical tools I need to work in this area. The inverter is going to go here, and there's plenty of air gap either side for the ventilation, which is very important. Behind here we have two air intakes where the old fridge freezer was situated, and we've got a gap at the bottom which will allow cold air to come in, and then also a gap at the top which will allow the hot air to go out. I may even fit a couple of ventilation fans on the left hand side, because I will be going to some very hot countries over the course of the next year or so. So the inverter's going here. We've got the Orion-Tr Smart. This is a 30 amp charger, and this will charge the battery system when we're actually driving, which is quite useful. So wherever I come to park up, I've always got a full charge without having to rely on the solar. Next we've got the Lynx Distributor and Shunt, and then we've got the MPPT 130 SmartSolar, and we've also got the MPPT 150, and then we got the Servo SGX, which will be at the top, and then the interface we will fit later once I know what the shelf height should be. Okay, we've managed to fit a few of the components onto the wall now. I'm not going to fit the rest yet until I've done some cable management. We've got the solar cables, 6mm, running up to the isolators that are going to be fitted on the top. We've also got some cables to run from the Servo SGX, but I'll explain all that later. But first I'm just going to get on with some cable management, which will take me a while. Okay, we've done all the cable management as neat as we can, and you must remember this is a very confined space, and it's more important to have good air ventilation to all the actual items, and also having it on this aluminium board is giving us a good earthing point throughout the whole system, which we'll discuss later. Now, we've got a 4-pole isolator here because we have 3 panels coming in at the front of the van, which is 66 volts. And they connect to the 30 MPPT controller. We also have one large panel which is 400 watts, which is connected to the 50 MPPT controller, and both of these are connected to the distributor using 16mm cable, and we've made sure that we have very good connections throughout the whole system. The Orion-Tr Smart is also connected at the bottom via 16mm cable, and we have one more terminal here which will connect to our inverter. Now we've got to run the data cables, and we've got data cable coming in from the shunt, and we've also got data cables coming in from both of the MPPT controllers. The Orion will automatically work out on the display at a later point. That comes in on a separate feed, and we've got our live in and live out on the AC side as well, and then we're going to connect up the main feed across to the battery, which is on the other side of the van. Okay, after quite a few hours of running cables, rerunning cables, trying to get everything as neat and tidy as possible, we've got all the actual solar and all the main power supplies going to each component, and we've run all the data cables. So let me explain the data cables. Firstly, we have a VE bus. This connects directly to the inverter. This will actually tell the Cerbo what power is being drawn on the system, and this will connect through the display screen. Then we have the VE Direct. This goes to each charge controller, MPPT controller, and what will happen there is it will show the amount of production from the sun, in other words the wattage that is actually being produced on each separate panel array, which you will see later in the video once we've got all the display up and running. Next, we've got the VE.Can. Now, the VE.Can runs all the way down to the Lynx, but remember, you can have multiple items on VE.Can systems. Therefore, the termination plug must be in the end of each line. We have one on the Lynx at here, and we have one on the Cerbo at the top here. That's basically all the cabling done, and now we're actually ready to mount the inverter and connect up the batteries. Okay, yesterday I spent most of the day in torrential rain fitting the DC cable. Why I do things when it's really bad weather, I have no idea, because I think I've got a cold from it, man flu, whatever you want to call it. But let me explain the whole system now we've got it ready to turn on. Firstly, I've run the DC cables across to the other side of the vehicle where the lithium iron phosphate battery is. It's the new type 1 and it's 300 amp hours. Basically from the DC cables here we go to an isolation switch just down the bottom, which I'll show you in a minute. We've also added a communication cable from the Lynx distributor to the shunt, we've also added the Servo SGX power cable, which I forgot to put in, and this has got a little inline fuse, and this powers the Servo SGX, which now goes to the display, which is this cable you can see here, and that's on the entrance of the vehicle. I worked out my shelf height, so I'm really happy where it is, and I'm able to see everything and program everything. Now what I've done is I've called a friend of mine up who is a Victron certified UK distributor, and he knows a lot more about this stuff than I do when it comes to the programming and everything. I'm not saying it's above my pay scale, but yeah, it is. So we're going to fire the whole unit up, and I'm going to introduce you to Russell, who will talk you through the technical side of it. Now, Russell has told me also to point out a couple of things. Before powering the unit up, we need to make sure that you've got the dip switches configured for the way that you're doing it on your vehicle. So that's a very important side. Also, we need to update all the firmware on all the equipment when actually installing it. But what we've done to make this video a bit shorter for you is we've already done this, but this will be in other videos that Russell will teach you how to do the upgrades on the software and the programming on each individual device. And as I said, we've got some other 360 rotational videos coming on each individual unit, so you can see all the screw sizes, the dimensions of the products and everything else, because there are variations on sizing and everything. But we're actually ready to turn everything on. So the first thing that I need to do is to power up the DC. Now the switch is down the bottom here. So here is the actual on-off for the power. This is the isolator for the power, and this is on the live coming across from the other side of the vehicle, and then this goes to the actual distribution or the Lynx. So we'll turn the power on. Okay, we're alive. So it's going to power up for about 5-6 minutes while everything is communicating. As you can see, we've got power lights on the distributor, power lights on the Lynx and the distributor. You can see that the bulk lights are flashing occasionally on the two MPPT controllers, and we've got the Wi-Fi flashing here, and shortly we should have Bluetooth and the display coming up. But let me take you round to the other side where we can actually have a look at the display itself while it's powering up. I'm not going to turn the PV on yet. I'm going to wait for the whole system to boot up correctly. We have got a green light now on the Cerbo as well, and the inverter has come on as well. So let's have a look at the display. Okay, the sun's come out and it's glaring down through the skylight on the van, so I do apologise about the lighting here. But as you can see, we've got an AC load on the unit. This is the display and it's touchscreen. Basically the AC load is showing 77 watts, and this is because I have a separate battery at the front of the vehicle for the DC lighting circuit, which I'm not going to change. I'm going to leave that as is. But what we'll do now is turn the solar on, and although it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I suspect that the forward panels should be producing 100 or so watts altogether. At the moment it's just coming online and we've got 85. Yeah, I thought it would be a bit more power than that, but the sun is low. It's 5. Oh no, it's just jumped up to 160, 170 watts. So what I'm going to do now is quickly just show you the battery installation, and then Russell will talk you through all the updates and everything that you need to do with all the firmware, and we'll do individual videos on each component with how to update the firmware and other bits and pieces in the future, and Russell will be doing these for me. Okay, we've come across to have a look at the battery. This is not finished yet because I've actually got to build a whole case around it to make sure the battery is well supported, and also I don't want anything falling on top of the battery, so I'm actually going to house this in its own department. I've run the cables over from the SAR side of the vehicle, and I decided to drop a 300 amp fuse in here. This is because if anything happened with driving over some debris on the road or whatever, and the cables got damaged underneath the vehicle, at least it's going to trip the fuse here, not the fuse on the actual Victron unit itself. So I've gone over the top with protection, and I think you should always do that with any motorhome. But what we have here is a Topband 12 volt 300 amp hour. This is a Bluetooth battery, so it's got communication protocols directly through Bluetooth, and it's also got a working temperature of -20 to 60 degrees. And how it's able to do this is it's got its own heating system built in, and you'll see all that in a different video. But this is a lithium iron phosphate, which is the new type of lithium ion battery, and it's basically, it's got the protections that I wanted for this vehicle, and especially when I'm going up over the mountain ranges in the Pyrenees and the Alps, some nights can get very cold when I'm not in the vehicle, and what I wanted was a battery that had a heating system that was able to maintain its operational performance with its own heating system built in. But you can watch all about this in another video. So let me pass you over to Russell, who will explain how to update all the systems, and he will be doing all the future videos with regards to the specific individual units.
Thanks, Paul. My name's Russell. I work for Victron Importer and Distributor in their technical support team. I've teamed up with Paul. We're going to do a few more videos in the future, both as educational and installation videos. What we're going to cover now is each individual unit on the installation, talk through the firmware updates, and also look at individual setup as well. Okay, so the first unit we're going to look at is the Servo SGX. So when you first power up this unit, you need to wait for both the Wi-Fi access point to be flashing green and the Bluetooth LED to be flashing blue. The Servo SGX is one of two variants of the Servo, but they both do the same thing. They're both the brains of the system, and they allow all the individual components to talk to each other. It also gives you a visual readout on the touchscreen display that you saw earlier with Paul. Now, firmware updates are optional with the Servo. I'll show you in another video how to check if a firmware update is available and how to carry it out. So now moving down the board, we've got the first SmartSolar controller 100/50. Now, as Paul mentioned earlier, we've got two sets of solar panel arrays on the roof. With them being different sizes, we need to have separate solar controllers for them. So if you remember from before, the actual voltage coming into this first controller is from the bigger panel. It's a 400 watt panel, and it's putting out 40-50 volts. But because it's a higher current, when the regulator then drops down to 12 volts, the current is going to be roughly 40 amps, which is why we've had to go for the 100/50. The 50 is the maximum charge current the solar controller will give to the batteries. Now you'll see we've also got 3 LED indicators on the bottom right hand corner. Bulk, absorption, float, which are your 3 stages of battery charging. When you first turn on the solar controller, make sure that there's no solar panels connected. You always turn on with the battery bank first, program the unit, and then finally commission by connecting the solar array. Again, in another video I'll show you how to do the firmware update. Normally you find with the solar controllers the firmware update is mandatory when you first power up, but as I say, I'll show you that in the next video. Moving down now to the second solar controller on the board, we've got the SmartSolar 100/30. Now if you remember from earlier in the video, this solar controller is for the smaller panels at the front of the campervan. Now although the voltage is higher, roughly 60 odd volts, the current is only about 5 amps. So again, when the regulator drops that down to 12 volts, you're roughly going to get no more than 25 amps charge current, which is why we've gone for the 100/30. Same as before, we've got the 3 visual indication LEDs to show you this charge status. One that you might have noticed is it's actually a SmartSolar. There is another variation called Blue Solar. SmartSolar is the Bluetooth version, Blue Solar is the non-Bluetooth version. Next we have the Lynx Distributor. This is the main power management board for the whole system. Paul didn't mention anything about individual fusing, so we'll cover that first. So the first 2 connections are for the solar controllers. Each solar controller has its own individual 60 amp mega fuse. The reason why it's 60 amp is that the solar controllers are never going to give out more than their rated current. So 60 amp is the next protection size up. I will point out as well the cable sizing. If you're not sure the size of cable, check out the Victron instruction manual. For these controllers it's 16mm squared cable. The next connection down, you will see the cable is a hell of a lot thicker. This is because it's dealing with a higher current from the inverter charger, and as such not only is the cable a lot bigger, but also the fuse is bigger at 300 amps. Again, by checking the instruction manual of the Victron MultiPlus, that will tell you the necessary cable size and the mega fuse size for the system. The final connection is for the battery to battery charger, and yes, Paul's already told you that it's not fully connected yet, but we've still got it on its individual fuse ready. 16mm squared cable is the recommended cable size, although I will point out, because Paul's starter battery is a lot further away than 2 meters, we are going to have to use bigger cable to allow for any voltage drop. You will also see that the Lynx Distributor is connected to another box. This is the Lynx Shunt. This will provide Paul with accurate state of charge as a percentage, but also you can see what current and watts are going in and out the battery. The Lynx Distributor has got individual fusing for each item. The Lynx Shunt has a system fuse, so this is bigger at 325 amps. This grey cable, obviously this will be tidied up before we put the lids on. This cable provides power to the Lynx Distributor. This means that if there's any mega fuse that's blown, Paul will get a visual indication by an LED lighting up. One thing to point out as well, ensure that you check all the tightness of the connections. If they're not really tight connections with no movement, you run the risk of burning a fuse and getting arcing. Finally, the battery cables are connected to the Lynx Shunt. Again, 70mm squared cable. It's still within the recommended cable length in the instruction manual, so we can use the same 70mm cable as what's connected to the MultiPlus. The positive lead coming from the Lynx Shunt is going to the battery, but it doesn't go directly. It goes via an isolation switch, which Paul showed you earlier. There is also a mega fuse on the other end of the cable right next to the battery. So although it isn't necessary to put the fuse there, Paul wanted to go overboard on the protection because the cable is going under the vehicle and could be susceptible to any flying debris off the road surface. We'll point out the battery does have its own built-in management system that will disconnect if there's any problems outside the operating parameters. But as I say, having the extra protection there with a fuse isn't going to do any damage. Talking about fuses, whilst we've got the mega fuse in the distributor and the system fuse in the shunt, going to the other extreme of size, the Cerbo has a little quick blow inline fuse in the positive lead. That's why it's not got separate connection and a separate mega fuse. Now we're going to look at the inverter charger. This is the item here. Now we did a power assessment with Paul, deciding how much power he's going to use when he's on the road. Obviously the priority is to keep the beers cold, because there's hell to pay if the beers are warm. From doing the power assessment, we've come up with the 2 kVA model. This is the compact model, so it's a little bit lighter and a little bit smaller, which as you can see was needed in this compact installation. Now I will go through in a separate video the full programming and setup with the MultiPlus, but a couple of things to point out. The dip switches, you use those to select the right charge profile for the right battery that you've got, and also in Paul's case, having the touch screen, that needs to be programmed as well so it works with the MultiPlus. As I say, we're not going to go into too much depth here. There will be separate videos coming up, and also going through the technical spec and the dimensions. Blue cable is for the data, so the MultiPlus will speak to the Cerbo and the Cerbo will show it on the touchscreen. We've also got AC power coming in, so when Paul's hooked up on a campsite, and I don't mean with a pretty young lady, but with mains power, the mains power will be used to charge his battery if he needs it, and also power his sockets. So we've got 2 mains cables, one for the power in from the shoreline and one for the power out going to his distribution board for the 230 volts and to his sockets. We have mentioned the thick cable going to his battery. That's securely connected. The MultiPlus does have an internal mega fuse on this model. Individual models will vary, but again, a bit of extra protection, another layer of protection, doesn't hurt on the road. We've got simple LED visual indication on the front, but to be fair for Paul, he's going to be using the touchscreen a lot more. So this is just simple visual indication if he needs it. Most of the interaction will be done via the touchscreen that you saw earlier in the video. Paul showed you the touchscreen display earlier that's going to give him on-site monitoring of his system when he's in the motorhome, but also because he's got the Servo SGX, he'll also be able to have remote monitoring via the Victron VRM online portal. Now Paul's been living in South Wales where the internet's not brilliant, so the last year or so he's been using Elon Musk's Starlink. This is now mobile for motorhomes, so Paul's going to have Starlink installed in this motorhome on his travels. Not only does this mean he'll be able to download and upload videos onto YouTube, speeds of up to 200 meg, so you can follow his videos and his story when he's on the road travelling. Another benefit though is that you'll also be able to log on to his online portal and view exactly what you're seeing here. So you can see how much power he's using, state of charge of his battery, and that's all thanks to Elon Musk's Starlink and Victron's VRM online portal. Earlier in the video you saw Paul quickly explain the touchscreen display. There's a couple of more things I want to go in a little more detail for you. So the home screen gives an overview of the system performance ranging from the state of charge of the batteries to the solar production. This is all very well if you're in the motorhome to see the touchscreen, but what if you're not? Now, Paul's been living in South Wales using Elon Musk's Starlink for the last year or so. The good news for you guys and girls is now Starlink is available as a mobile data broadband connection for motorhomes, and that's what Paul's going to have on his travels. So not only can you view his YouTube videos, see how his travels are going, but you can also see how the performance of the system happens in real life. This is using something called a Victron VRM portal, which is an online browser. What this will show is how the system is performing, whether Paul's remembered to turn his fridge on, whether his beers are going to be cold, or whether somebody's going to be drinking lukewarm beer all weekend and have a mood on him. Now, with the touchscreen display, we have a settings menu. Again, we're not going to go into too much detail today, but there will be a video coming up of Paul's off-grid 50 kilowatt home storage system. Now that will be of interest to see how much money it's saving him from using less electric from the grid. That's also connected with Elon Musk's Starlink, but the important thing for you is that having the mobile Starlink from Elon Musk in the motorhome means that you guys can not only follow his travels, but see how well the system performs in real life.
And there we go, the whole system's up and running, as you can see. We've got the compact 12 volt 2000 watt, two MPPT controllers, the Servo SGX, the Lynx Distributor, the Lynx Shunt and the Orion Smart Controller. The only thing left to do in here is to drop the Perspex panel on to stop any of the clothes ever getting close to any of the electronics. And the most important thing about all this is now the beer is cold. Thanks very much indeed for watching this video. I hope you found it informative and helpful. Please click the like button and subscribe button, as that really does help our channel. And if you really want to support the website, you can always click on the Buy Paul a Beer page. Thanks again for watching.